Well, thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And this is another fun-filled afternoon where I get to join with the preeminently, wonderfully talented gentleman sitting across the glorious United States. But this is Why People Believe Things That Ain't So. And it's a show brought to you by Mr. Robert Mills,
Good
who
morning.
does it.
Or good afternoon to you, I should say.
Well, afternoon it is. How are you doing, Robert?
I'm doing fabulous, Randy. It's always honored to be on your show, and I'm always look forward to it.
Well, we look forward to you sharing your insights into what's going on in the world. And a lot is going on in the world. We certainly had a new administration take over last week in ways unparalleled. We had the tragedy of today of the American Airlines flight that was accident in any regard, loss of life. And our prayers and our thoughts are with those people that were on the plane and the families that were behind, because those tragedies of flying, while the last airlines to go down in the United States lost a life was in 2011. This one was being looked at a lot. It's one of those aviation, helicopter and a plane got in the way of each other, and unfortunately a lot of loss of life. So we certainly while doing this show, one of the nice things that Mr. Mills has brought to us is a huge background, having been a class action lawyer representing and fighting the good fight for the people well, I think not only California, but across the United States, had a tremendous practice in with a number of attorneys in his particular firm, but also Robert has traveled the world, which we're going to cover in other shows. We're going to have him in our Happy Hour Lifestyle show, which we talk about we have in the past talked about his going to Morocco and South America and flying his plane upside down and landing by flashlight. And I don't know, those stories are going to be coming forward. But Robert has done things also by giving guided tours out in San Francisco, being on numerous boards that are too many to mention, but certainly his thoughts about taking care of the planet and mindful thinking is where he comes from. And of course, this is not a political show. This is just simply what we talk about, trying to talk about what's going on in the world today. And I like to listen. And today, Robert, with the inauguration last week, certainly 300, what do they, I guess you sign your name and you just enact bills is what the new president has done. Sat down and has gone through a lot of magic markers, signing his presidential declarations over the past week, some that have gone through, some that have gone to the court, but certainly been an interesting 10 days in the world of the United States. What are you thinking?
Wow, Randy, that's an understatement. And we have a very interesting podcast for you today, listeners. And we're going to cover some stuff, as Randy and I always do, that you're not going to hear anywhere else. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be worthwhile. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk a little about California, this great nation state out on the West Coast, what things look like from there. I'm now a 54-year resident there. Randy and I went to high school together back in Illinois. And we're also going to talk just a bit about the Trump promises, the campaign promise. We're not going to do it, as Randy just said, from the standpoint of politics. Okay, I'm not going to talk about whether birthright citizenship is a good thing or a bad thing. You listeners and viewers, you have your own views on that, and we're not going to address that, the merits of it. What we're going to talk about is something that you will find, Trump or anti-Trump will find interesting, and that is whether those things are feasible. Are they going to actually happen? And if so, when and how? A lot of it's impractical. A lot of it's illegal. A lot of it violates the Constitution. So what as we said now, which of these things is going to likely happen and when and why? And we're also going to talk about, as I mentioned, about California. There was a whole lot of campaign promises, and a lot of it is a lot of people said, well, it's just impractical, like mass deportation. There are 15 million people at least. Some people say it's way more than that. nobody knows for sure, but at least 15 million illegal immigrants in the United States. And they represent about somewhere between 7 and 9, some people say more, percent of the entire gross domestic product. 1 in every 18 people in Texas is illegal. So you just can't go and remove those people without having a lot of problems. Some people say it would throw us into a deep recession. They pay a lot of taxes. They pay Social Security when they never get it. They just subsidize the rest of us by paying Social Security. And so we're going to see what happens here. And so we identified in that last podcast we did before the inauguration a whole bunch of these major promises that I said then were never going to happen. I mean, just never going to happen. Not because they're good ideas or bad ideas, because they're impractical. There's already 800 judges doing deportations, and there's thousands of ICE people, and they're 6 years behind in their law and their court logs, backlogged. And you bring in millions of people, you're going to have to bring tens of thousands of ICE agents, create hundreds of, maybe even thousands of courtrooms, and have to play someplace to put them. They said yesterday we're going to put them in Gitmo, Guantanamo Base in Cuba. We'll see about that. So anyway, there are practical, and this would all take years and years and years to go through the courts and so forth. And so we'll address that. But first, I'm going to have a little fun with you here, and we're going to talk about things from California. We're going to talk about California. There's something, as I mentioned, I went to, I was born in the South. I was born in Raleigh, and my parents, my sixth great grandfather was the head of the Virginia House of Burgesses, the first democratic institution in North America in 1630. And so I have this roots going back all the way. Of course, we all have, I have royalty, and I have, a lot of I'm a Mills, and a lot of my Mills ancestors were illiterate pig farmers in Raleigh. So we're all over the place as everybody is. And so I lived in 10 states. And in my junior year, my father moved me to a little town called Freeport, Illinois, in the northwest corner in the prairie and it was a fascinating little town, a great town with great people. It had an extraordinary high school that graduated an inordinate number of people and went on to Ivy League colleges. Remember that, Randy? We had some Harvard people come from, and so I ended up at the University of Illinois because I got the physics award, as you may remember, and I thought I was going to be a physicist. And I went down to the University of Illinois, this great physics engineering school, and I discovered, as often people do, that I wasn't good at it at all.
That's funny. I didn't know that. My major at NIU, what paid for it was throwing the discus, but I was a physics and chemistry major. Equally didn't like the physics class that I was sitting in, had taken it in high school. And just as a side note, when I was in my second year of physics, sitting next to the classic nerd who came in a plaid sport coat and a tie and a flannel shirt and the pocket protector with 42 different pencils and stuff, never took a note. He would come in and, of course, ace every test, in the world. I would sit there with, formulas and things on the mirror and all this stuff, and is going through cement. And I was like,
I had the same experience. They had the slide rules. They just mopped the floor with me, and the effortlessly and get A's. I would struggle and get a C,
Well, that's what I was trying to do, and I couldn't even spell vector. I mean, Victor, I was like, Victor, that was good in the movie, but for me in physics, it was a fight to get that C, so.
Well, I ended up taking a philosophy course at the University of Illinois, and I thought, discovering the study of knowledge and the study of all these ideas about the universe. And it just spoke to me.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking, maybe I'm in the wrong major. So I cast around, and one of my advisors says, why don't you go to the University of California at Berkeley, because they have the best public university in philosophy in the United States. So I applied, and had no money, and I went out there, and I went to the Free University, which wasn't accredited, and I hung out, and I just fell in love with California. I fell in
Yeah,
love with.
my whole switch was I took an anthropology course, switched things, loved it, just a basic course in anthropology, and then astronomy. I loved that, and studying rocks. There were different things in science I was fascinated by, and then NASA came along, and they were looking for astronauts for this thing called the shuttle program. So they asked us if we would take Russian, to get ready for that. So I applied to get into NASA. And it was a very, very interesting time of my life because I was there basically, we both were there during the Vietnam era. I didn't have where you went. I mean, my life was very, very different, but ended up years later getting a degree in communication. So we all start off on a path. When I went back, I got 3 degrees late in life in communication and video and doing what I'm doing now.
That's
Uh, it just
I never knew any of this, Randy, about you, this background.
no, I went no, I have over 200 hours of college credits, from aviation ground school. Always have been in school, but about 12, 13 years ago, I always felt that I really just, because of what I was doing in business, that communication law was something that I needed. I was appointed chairman of the Ecology Global Network, which came out of the blue. I didn't even know what that meant. I said, send me a job description. But I felt that media law was important at the time. So I went back and found out that I still had the ability to have my scholarship put in place. And NIU said, well, why don't you just go full time? I mean, if you want, you can. So I ended up taking all these classes for 3 semesters while working downtown in a big philanthropic project, riding the train and taking 18 hours a semester, pulling a 4 point, by the way, just so you know,
You
and
what?
a 4 point during this
What
time.
point? Ah, yes, yes, yes.
And but I completed when they got done. They said, now if you take this and that and the other thing, you can actually have 3 degrees in communication. So it was rhetoric, or organizational and media, and so it was quite fun. It really was quite fun. And being an older guy that sat in the back of the class, where all the freshmen hate the old guy sitting in the back of the class because they're there to learn while they're there to maybe not we have his intent, in doing things. But I got to know the kids really well for 3 semesters, and at the end of that time, of course, tried to help get them hired, get them placed, did a lot of things and in fact, I taught the rhetoric class as an undergrad my second semester because the teacher had a stroke and he asked me if I would teach the class while he was there because he couldn't because he was impaired. So we sat 2 desks at the front of the class and I taught, which was okay with Northern. It was a lot of fun. But the point was, and not to cut you off, but the point was sharing this memory is that the kids back then got me, they knew I was a big NIU football fan, got me a big, very expensive parka and a rocking chair. So I thought it was, they said they didn't want the old guy to catch pneumonia when he went to an NIU game. So as we go through life, and that's why I think both you and I growing up in Freeport, well, I grew up in Freeport completely. But that high school, don't forget, we also had 2 musicians that went on to have illustrious careers. In fact, I think Lance Elbeck still plays for the New York Philharmonic. They've played in both of them participate. Martha Babcock, both of them have participated in Carnegie Hall, and they were amazing musicians. So Freeport, where we grew up, a very, very interesting town history-wise. Just to lay the groundwork, which is where I think you're going with this. We both had the benefit of having a community that was a lot of history to it, going back to 1832 when it was incorporated. Then also being the end of one of the lines on the Underground Railroad. So a lot of transitional families came to Freeport after the Civil War. And Freeport also in 1927 was very open-armed to the blacks and the slaves that came to Freeport. They had the first black principal appointed in education in Freeport in 1927. So that was a daughter of
The
a,
Lincoln Douglas debates in Freeport,
they were, yeah,
in 1860 in that election. So I, my parents had no money to give me to college. I had to do it by borrowing and working, and so it took me 3 years to figure out how to transfer and
same as mine. I had no money. My dad said when I was 18, "Hey, I hear you're graduating June 6th from Freeport. Give us your new address August 1st if you could." And I said to him at the time, I said, "Well, I give you that right now. Actually, I have a full ride scholarship to go to Northern because I threw the discus and it'll be at NIU." That was the first he heard of it. Nobody in my family, other than one of my cousins, and of course Daryl Fenton, that we was in our class, my cousin. We were the first cousins to go to college in my family, but we also had to do it on our own. So that's where both you and I come from, Robert.
yeah, I mean, Berkeley was out of state, and it was
Yeah,
very inexpensive. In state, but I had to pay out of state, and so I could only afford to go 1 year to get a degree, and so I had to take double load because I had no prerequisites in philosophy, so I had to take a 20-unit load a quarter, and that Berkeley's notoriously rigorous. I mean, it's a really full-time job to take 12, so I took 20, and I'm proud to say I got a 4.0, and so then I was going to go get a PhD in philosophy. My advisor said, "Robert, have you looked at the numbers?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There's 3,500 PhDs graduating every year in the U.S., and there's 30 jobs or 300 jobs. You're going to end up driving a cab in Manhattan with your PhD. Do you want to do that?" And I said, and he said, "Have you ever considered going to law school?" And ding. So
there you
I
go.
applied to law school in San Francisco, and was accepted. And now 55 years of California, did a bunch of businesses there, and I'm retired now, and I'm on nonprofit boards, and I do like in Civil Rights Alliance, do green lobbying in Sacramento, and I lead history tours in San Francisco for the city. Actually, we with my help as a lawyer, we set up our own 501c3 charity for our thing. But if you go online, sfcityguides.org. It's this organization of 350 volunteer guides. We lead 115 tours, and 65 or so regularly, in all the neighborhoods, every imaginable subject: architecture, history, Golden Gate Bridge, culture, you name it. We got a tour for you. And I was on the board of directors there for about 6 years, and I'm in charge of the Gold Rush Tour, our most popular, and I lead the American history in Golden Gate Park and private tours, and I'm a writer and a podcaster, and I've had the privilege of writing articles for your journals, and as you can see, being on your podcast, and all of this, and I also ran a securities firm in San Francisco, a consumer class action law firm, and as I flew all over the country with my plane with my lawyers to file these cases all over the place, and I've been to every state. In fact, I've flown my airplane to every state except Hawaii, of course. And the point of all this is that I spend a lot of time talking to non-Californians about California, and I lead people on these tours. And oftentimes, I have people literally from 4 continents come on these tours, and they are fascinated by California. They want to ask me about California and San Francisco, and other people from other states come here. And one of the things that jumps out at me about all this, and I have some expertise in this because I've been doing it, is how misunderstood and poorly understood California is, not only with non-Californians, but with Californians who understand our own state. So I think you listeners are going to find this following discussion fascinating, as do the tourists and the locals that come on my tours. So I'm going to run the drill with you here about this, and the biggest misconception that people have about California, and this is important, okay, is that they think California is a place, okay, in the same sense that they think that, say, Iowa is a place, okay. You can go around Iowa, it still looks like Iowa. People pretty much, but California is not like that, It's not this or that. It can't be that. California is a realm of regions. It is each one of them vastly different from the others, even those adjacent to it. California is the most diverse and different place from its parts from each other of any place on earth by far. It's a land of extremes, superlatives, in many ways like no other place on earth. Okay, we'll start with the easy stuff, the fun stuff, the topography and the climate. We have the highest mountain in the United States, continental United States, Mount Whitney, and it's only 90 miles, air miles, crow miles, from Badwater, which is this sometimes dry lake bed in the floor of Death Valley, that's 288 feet below sea level. And you can stand on the 11,049-foot summit of Telescope Peak, which is this huge mountain in the middle of Death Valley National Park, as I have many times. And you can look down over here to your right, and you can see Badwater. And then, 90 miles away, you can look over and you can see the summit of Mount Whitney. You can see permanent ice. And Badwater is not only the lowest place in North America, it's the hottest place on the surface of the earth in the summer months. And you can see them both. You can see ice in the Sierras, and you look down and see the lowest place in North America, all the same spot, and you can also see White Mountain Peak from the telescope. They measured the lowest humidity ever recorded on Earth on that. And then in that same range inside of that are the oldest things on Earth, the bristlecone pines, 5,500-year-old trees. And Death Valley National Park is a park that is now the size of Connecticut. And it has average over the whole thing, less than 2 inches of rain a year, okay? And that's distorted because most of that falls on the mountaintops. And there's huge parts of that park and huge parts of California where no rain falls at all for years on end, okay? In the meantime, in the coastal mountains of California, it rains over 100 inches a year. And you have these gigantic redwoods, tallest trees on Earth, over 400 feet high, some of them. Giant sequoias in the Sierras, biggest trees on Earth. And California is bigger than most people appreciate, especially in the East. The northwest corner of the state is over 1,000 miles from the southeast corner. If you cut California out with a pair of scissors and you dragged it over to the east, it would stretch from Maine to just short of Georgia. It would go from Canada, where that part that comes down, and it would from there almost all the way to Florida. California has the same population as Canada. It has millions more than Denmark, New Zealand, and Australia combined. And the gross domestic product of this nation state of California is the fourth largest in the world. Now, we recently passed Japan. Japan has 125 million people. California has 39 million people. We now have a bigger economy. So that makes the fourth largest. And there are many people who think that soon, sometime maybe in this decade, we will pass Germany. Germany has its economy shrank 2 years in a row. And will become the third biggest economy in the world. US, China, California. And California has an economy that's almost twice as big as the entire Russian Federation. Take that, Putin. You cut it in half, we could still take on Putin, okay? Now, back to this theory of extremes, California has now the poorest and most poverty-stricken region in the entire United States, our big northwest corner, which is bigger than most states. Okay, it starts about 100 miles north of San Francisco, goes another 350 miles to the Oregon border. Okay, and every industry in that region upon which the economy is based has collapsed. The Russian and Japanese trawlers wiped it out. Climate change, timber, the drought and wildfires ended it. Mining just ran out. Tourism, no more. Farming and ranching, drought and the drop in the price of beef just crushed those businesses. And even growing illegal marijuana, which is the big cash crop, was wiped out when California legalized marijuana. So there are now millions of people living in this region that are hungry. California has 5 million people that are hungry, okay? And if you just take the median family income of Trinity County, which is county in the middle of this area, it's a $27,000 a year median family income in contrast to 200,000 in Santa Clara County. Um, and in blinding contrast to this region to the north of San Francisco is the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay. And it's just a relatively small area. You can go up on a hill and look at, you can see the mountains in Santa Cruz to the south of it, and the mountains, the McComas Mountains in the Napa Valley to the north of it. It's 9 little counties, 90 miles by 40 miles. You can drive across it in 2 hours. And it's the richest place on earth and the most educated. 35% of the population has a master's degree or higher. And the total GDP of these little tiny counties is bigger than the Netherlands, Sweden, or Saudi Arabia. And it's the innovation capital of the entire earth, has been for a long time. Television was invented there. One in every 3 Nobel Prizes, one in every 3 in all fields ever was awarded to someone working in the Bay Area. One in every 8 Nobel Prizes was just at Stanford and Berkeley alone. One in every 7 if you throw in UC Medical Center. One in every 7 is little. San Francisco alone is a city that is tiny. I think most people don't realize how tiny San Francisco is. It's 46 square miles. It's 6 by 8. You can walk across it, stroll across it in 2 hours, okay? And yet, it has 200 companies in it now that are worth over $1 billion that were founded less than 25 years ago. That's more than China. That's 1 in every 8 companies on earth that's now worth over $1 billion. I mean, in this one little itty bitty place there, Twitter and TV were invented in San Francisco. Where would we be without Twitter, right? But many dozens of other high-tech inventions that I never heard of. My kids haven't heard of it, but from personal computers, smartphones, all that invented in this place, and essentially at this point, 100% of all the patents in AI and all of the drugs manufactured in zero-G and low Earth orbit are held by San Francisco or Bay Area companies. And this assures that the future will continue to be invented in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now, people also, they talk about the homeless, and a lot of the conservatives love to dwell on this, and they portray San Francisco as if it's some hellscape. And we fixed the homeless problem last year, and this new mayor, this heir to his Lord David Laureate, he's an heir to the Blue Jeans fortune, Levi Strauss, and he and the president, they've taken all these hotels over, and they have bought, they put the homeless there. And I lead tours all over downtown and out in the park and everywhere, and they're gone. I mean, and we never had that many of them. They were just very prominent. And actually, they're homeless all over the world now, all over the U.S. They're homeless people, and in fact, there's homeless people in Copenhagen. My niece is there, and she told me, and I saw them in Portugal. Look, if you took pictures of them and compared them, the ones you would see anywhere else, they all look alike. You wouldn't know where you were. But we're fixing it, Californians are used to dealing with a lot of misinformation about California. I led a securities firm back in the 80s, and I developed this platform that traded limited partnership securities, and it became the biggest in the world, okay, which is exaggeration because it was just this little teeny dumpster area of $120 billion worth of product out there, which is a microscopic dot in the securities world. Trillions go every day. But I went to Wall Street to market my company, and I was just shocked at the ignorance about California and the resentment, the jealousy about it, and I had to constantly correct these brokers, these big shot guys on Wall Street. They kept confusing LA with San Francisco. They couldn't distinguish. No, I live up there with the bridges, the red bridge you call the Golden Gate. And it's kind of a myth, I think, but there's this popular joke here among Californians about a New Yorker who's coming to a business conference, and he calls up and he says, "I'm at the airport." And they say, which airport? Can you pick me up? Can you tell me which airport? He says, "I'm at LAX." And we have to point out to him that if you Google it, the LAX airport is 379 miles south far from San Francisco Airport, but they don't know the difference. So the listening as a Californian, to this discussion of these wildfires in LA is it just plays on this ignorance misinformation thing here. I was reported that Gavin Newsom, our governor, cut the wildfire budget by $100 billion. It actually, the budget's grown every year since he took office, and there's these reports that there were these prescription burns would have helped, but there's no evidence that any such burns, however aggressive they were, when you burn out the stuff ahead of time, because it was 100-mile-an-hour winds. They were hot and dry from a January with no rainfall, January, and a lot of vegetation from the previous year. And the fires, went from roof to roof, from building to building, didn't go along the ground. No firefighting system on Earth, especially in an urban area, is set up to deal with a conflagration like that. So Trump came out and saying that we ran out of water due to mismanagement, and the reservoirs were empty. In fact, the reservoirs are all full. They're at record levels. Rainy, you see, the fire just did run low on pressure, but that had nothing to do with that. It was because of this unprecedented intense demand, and they fill back up when the reservoirs. So Trump said that Newsom refused to sign the water restoration declaration, turning the spigot, as he put it, allowing water to flow from Northern California to Southern California, and that we prioritized the smelt, these little fish in the delta, but there was no restoration declaration, and the smelter in the Sacramento River Delta, which is 400 miles north of LA, and an area wholly different drainage, disconnected in every way to the fires. So experts scratch their heads, what are they talking about? There's no connection between the smelt and the fires and the water, any of it. So this harkens back to 2018 when Trump visited devastation. We had a lot of fires in Northern California then. And he said that this was our fault because we didn't rake the forest. Okay, now he got this idea because he'd been to Finland. And Finland has conifers in the north, but they have this large area in the south of deciduous trees, and they drop their leaves. And they do rake those leaves to prevent, forest fires. But most people in the east don't know this. But other than a few small number of cypress trees, there are no native trees in California that drop leaves, okay? Even our oak trees out here are evergreen. We call them live oaks, and so essentially all the shrubs are evergreen. So raking the forest, would do nothing because there's nothing on the floor of the forest, no leaves like there is in the east, okay? And the fires, were in residential neighborhoods where there was nothing much to rake anyway. And the travel, as I mentioned, the fire went horizontally. You could watch it, from roof to roof and wooden structure, never touching the ground, So again, this shows how completely out of, So it was very disheartening here to us in California, listening to this response to this tragic fires. Instead of offering to help us, he can't resist making all these innocent people the basis of some political thing here, calling our governor new scum, and talking about not raking the forest and the spigots and all, getting the money, getting the water, he said, from the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Northwest is Oregon and Washington, is thousands of miles from here, and so just listening to this thing, it's quite disheartening, and it's really caused by climate change. Because you've never had 100-mile-an-hour winds, hot and dry in January, and the unimaginable scale of this put it in something that it just couldn't have been prepared for.
Well, they said, when it came to the homes on Malibu, they were ignited because of the flames that were south, I believe, that blew up down through the valley, up over the hills, and then it was just a firestorm of sparks that landed on their roofs. I mean, there was no vegetation in their area to rake. I mean, you're on the shore of the ocean. There's no forest around there. It was just a rain shower of fire and no way to, I mean, it's so absurd. And again, you don't want to be political, but at the same standpoint in time, you got to deal in reality. In this whole scenario, they ran out of water. Well, it's unprecedented that any water system, holding the containers for the water or the electric to pump the water had been turned off. I mean, it was just unparalleled, catastrophe that, that hit all at once. And I mean, I look at it, you know, in sort of in a tough way, but did we move into an area, as humankind, we shouldn't be living there. We might want to go camp there, but maybe we shouldn't live there because of these dangers now, that are coming. Sort of like our friends down in Florida.
Do the architecture of these houses and make things, there was a journalist who, apropos your point earlier, who reported standing there and he's seeing this ember fly by in the air a mile from or a half a mile from the, and hit a house and ignite the house.
Right.
And the house catch on fire and burn. And so the transmission was something that, all the raking and the leaves and all the, what it would take is going to take, and this may be anywhere, is it's going to take building houses out of different things and putting reservoirs of water in the roofs and stuff and that sort of thing and sprinkler systems, that's a whole different ball game. But anyway, I've been to the 50 states, as I mentioned, and flown my plane to 49. I mean, I have found charming people in interesting places in all the states. And a lot of people think that Californians look down their nose. Trump's people tell you, we don't. We don't look down our nose at anybody. And so it's amusing to me on another front here that we see this animosity to the federal budget. I'm going to talk about a plan I have. I have a solution to fixing this whole problem about the federal thing that will work, and it's easy and it's nonpartisan, which we'll get to shortly here. But Californians, they listen to people talking about the federal, and especially Mike Johnson from Louisiana, the Speaker of the House. And California puts a great deal more money into the federal budget, in the federal pot of money, than we get back. And in general, the blue states put more money in than they get back, the red state. And no state gets more proportionally by capita than Louisiana. And so when we see these states who are feeding at the trough of the other wealthier states, saying we want to crush the federal government, we think, wait a minute, if we just said to tomorrow, okay, California, we'll go along, let's get rid of the federal government, we'll keep the military and the mail system, and then everything else will be done by the states. We win big by that because we get to keep that money for ourselves. We can upscale things, So it's an amusing discussion to hear that going
Well,
on.
the other thing, if you think about it, I'm going to touch back on your immigration issue. With the number of illegals that you have living in California, a lot of them work in food processing in the fields, I would imagine. Where, the breadbasket of a lot of the food that everybody eats all over the country is grown in California. So let's assume that all of the people working in the fields, which is tough, laborious, low paid pretty much. Let's assume all of them were illegals and they remove them. Who's going to take those jobs, number one? So now you get into a competitive scenario. If you're going to go hire people, and the wages that would have to be paid to the people that are legally living here to attract people to harvest the crops, to tend to the crops. You talk about food inflation. It would be, to even find people to work the fields would be remarkably difficult. So
that's one of the things that, when I address that here down the road about practicality, is that the meat packing, the harvesting, cleaning houses, a lot of construction stuff. There are these huge pockets of areas where the immigrant population is concentrated. They are hired by companies that are often owned by Republicans or in conservative communities, and serve those communities, like the farm community. California raises 30-some% of all the food in America, and so if you go into these industries and you pull all those people out, they're doing jobs that Americans don't want to do. And
Right.
you pull them all out, you would wreak havoc. And so right now, the conservatives in those areas, the people who own this, are rushing to the government and saying, look, don't do this because you're going to wreck our economy. So that's another thing that's just not appreciated. The way to solve this problem is to get a legal path for them, which they had bipartisan huge support for and got it passed. And then Trump said, don't do it because I want to run on that. And so they withdrew it. But that's the
Well,
solution.
I wouldn't want to be owning golf courses right now. Uh, 'Cause it might be self-defeating finding people that want to mow and rake and fertilize and have those skill sets. Again, it takes, I know of some courses that have skilled labor that show up right at a little before sunup, do an amazing amount of work before the golfers get there. And if you had to believe that they were illegal immigrants, I would tend to believe that because they generally cut 6, 8 paychecks for 14 to 20 people that show up. I mean, you can't even
They produce,
measure the work that they get done.
the immigrants produce somewhere, depending who you ask, 7 to 9% of the entire GDP. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a lot. And these 14 million people. And if you were just to pull that out and it collapsed, it would cause a recession or depression in
Well,
the country.
and again, just coming back from the world's biggest trade show in the world of golf, I found this statistic. My jaw hit the table. But more people work in the world of golf, in a multi-billion-dollar industry that drives economies in ways you can't imagine. But more people work in the world of golf than work in food service.
Well,
Think about that.
that's
And you sit there and you go, what? I mean, I couldn't imagine that, thinking that, again, you have dishwashers and people that are doing jobs, cooks, line cooks, people in all the restaurants around the world. But you take the golf industry and the restaurant industry, and let's say that, the Mr. Trump is, he gets 100% of everybody, all however many, 15 million people out of the country. Who is going to fill those jobs?
nobody.
Where, where, where is that? Where is that going to happen? Not going
So
to
that's one of the practical objects. So going back here to we're going to come back down to the promises and what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. In my earlier podcast was pointing out why it can't happen. And let's go back just for a second to the 2016 campaign promises, where he said he was going to build this great big beautiful border wall, and Mexico was going to pay for it. And it was good old mass deportation. And in 2017, he deported less people than Biden, or Obama many times more deportations total, and he, in his first year than Trump ever did, in his whole 4 years. So it's not going to happen, okay? And so now we're into this, and he's made all these 2024 promises. Is he going to finesse them and just walk away from them the same way he did in 2016? And the answer is probably not. This time there's a lot less restraints, but he's not doing that. He's actually seeking to enforce the 2024 promises and make good on them. Okay, and I want to emphasize that I'm using the word seek to make good on them, because to actually make good on them will require, is a huge thing. It's going to have to be something that's practical and something that is legal, and the courts can apply. There's a big difference between issuing an executive order and saying get rid of birthright citizenship and it actually happening. Okay, and big difference between mass deportations and all these obstacles which we're talking about, make it impractical. Okay. And so let's start about this birthright citizenship. We know that he's not going to achieve anything if the courts just throw this stuff out. Okay, at least that's what would appear on the surface. However, there's a lot of people say that a significant goal is not to actually get these things done, but it's actually just to virtue signal to the base, saying, look, this is my goal, my aspiration is to do this, and the courts blocked me, and so it's their fault, but for the courts, okay. just as today he said that the two airplanes collided because of the Democrats and the DEI. You know, that's why there was this crash. You know, he said that in the press conference.
Well, the other thing that came out in the last before we came on is that the hiring practices that the traffic controllers were guidelines that they were hired under were from the Trump 1 era. They
Well,
were they were under his guidelines of hiring. So, you know, to take, in all due respect, again, we didn't want to be political. And from a standpoint of sitting and taking the opportunity to get in front of the microphone and turn it political when they're still respectfully retrieving the bodies out of the water, and not caring for the people that are sitting back in Kansas, and even thinking about that. I mean, this is, you know, people lost their lives. They lost parents. There were actually Russian skaters that were on that plane.
yes.
The US skating part members that we had this training. They had parents and coaches and, you know, A-class, A+ athletes that were on that plane. Not that that makes any difference from any of the other people, human beings that were on that plane, but they didn't even have time to know that they were going to die. I went from being hit, being in the water, they're dead. Their life is over.
It was an instantaneous thing. You know, I'm a pilot, so I got zillion you know, texts and emails from my friends who are pilots, and they were all of us were mystified by what happened for several reasons. Um, Number one is that this accident, every plane now, and you can't go into that area around Washington, which they both were, without having a TCAS. That's a transponder collision avoidance system device. You know, I had it in my plane. They're not that expensive, and you put them on, and it's a screen that shows you. It's keys off of the transponder, so it shows you the relative location of every plane within, you can set it, you know, 5 miles, 2 miles, you know, they use typically 5 miles and 2 miles. And if any plane comes into that, it's designed with a potential collision course. The device goes onto this microphone that comes out in the cockpit and it says, traffic, traffic, traffic. And boy, you jump up and you look and you can take evasive actions. So both of the planes had TCASs, number one. Number two is the controllers who were supervising this. They also have a similar thing that warns them about potential conflicts, okay? So as we look at this thing, how is this possible that these planes in this thing, and this the big jet was on the final approach to the airport at National Airport. How did they not, how did it happen? And some people start speculating it was intentional and everything else. And you know, who knows? I mean, it's tempting to jump in these things and start speculating, but it's very perplexing to ask, you know, why the air traffic controllers, you know, this chopper is coming along down the river, past the White House, and here comes this jet, and they're air traffic, they're all in the same system. They're all watching, and they're under direct, immediate. It's an intensely controlled area. It's called Class Bravo airspace, and you know, why did they not see this coming? Why didn't they warn them? You know, both cockpits were screaming collision, you know, and they somehow, and so, and not only that, the final mystery of this to me and other aviation people is it was a hell, you know, they could see it, you know, like sometimes there's a blind spot with planes if one of them is rising up, you know, they can't see each other. This was, you know, they could look out the window, the helicopter, and see this plane with its lights, landing lights on. I mean,
I thought, all due respect, my understanding was that helicopter hit the tail section of that plane.
Well, whatever the hit of the plane, the plane had the landing lights on. It was lit up. Like, I mean,
but they were saying that if the helicopter was behind the plane, so the other thing,
the plane was coming up at you know, the plane was coming down and that came up at a 45-degree angle and ran into it head on that way. So the pilots were sitting there seeing this plane landing, and and many pilots are all saying there's how so they start suggesting conspiracy of, it was intentional something.
Mm,
We have to find out, what, but it is extremely bizarre because it defies explanation in terms of the visual of both the pilots and the TCAS in both airplanes and air traffic control. What were they doing? Where was air traffic control? Why didn't they yell at those? I've been in many, airports and have the controllers come on, and say, descend and turn left 45 because immediately, descend because they see a potential conflict 5 miles before it happens, and
mm.
they have the computers on their screens that tell them this. And so, where were the traffic controllers, and why this? We got a lot to figure out here, about how this could have even happened, and so it'll be interesting to see that. Um, okay, so back to the plan here. Uh, the administration is, as I see it, doing its best to try to enforce these campaign promises, and that's resulting in they're going to be litigating, and so we're going to moving into this phase right now between these promises being made and being struck down by the courts. A lot of them are blatantly illegal, and then we have to wait from some period of time, could be years, until it's finally settled by the Supreme Court. So we're going into this uncertainty phase that's going to last quite a while. Okay, and so I stand by my earlier things in our last podcast about these things not being able, for practical and economic and legal reasons, that they're not going to happen, and they're just not going to happen. And let's start with the easy one here. Let's start with birthright citizenship. Um, this one that the experts scratch their heads about. I mean, from the get-go, because it's so clear. I mean, it only took hours, not days, not weeks, not months, hours from the time the EO was passed, ordering the federal government not to honor birthright citizenship, before a veritable armada of lawyers from 2 dozen states and the ACLU and a bunch of other organizations leaped into federal court, and the federal judge enjoined it. In other words, he said, no, stop it right there. And blocked it pending federal review. Okay, and that's exactly what happened last Thursday. A federal judge, a conservative Republican appointee, said they'd never seen in his 4 decades on the bench, never seen a clearer, more clearly unconstitutional order in his career. And he expressed astonishment to the lawyers to their face. How could you even make such an argument with a straight face? He said it boggles the mind. That's what the judge said. And it's blatantly unconstitutional. Federal judges don't talk like that. I can tell you, I've been in courts for 50 years, a lawyer, and they don't talk like that, and unless something is extreme. And this is a conservative Republican judge, okay, and so. It will absolutely be appealed to the Supreme Court, and it will stay there. So let's take a peek at what's going to happen there at the Supreme Court. Okay, the history of Supreme Court in the 14th Amendment is fascinating. Okay, the 14th Amendment was enacted after the Civil War, as you know, in 1868. And to provide that, the blacks, remember the Dred Scott decision says if you're black, you can never, you're property. You can never be a human being. You can never be a citizen, no matter what. That's what the Dred Scott decision is. And the 14th Amendment reversed that. Okay. And this exact same issue again came before the Supreme Court in the late 1890s. Okay. There was a Chinese couple. They went to San Francisco. And while they were there in the 1870s, they had a young son. They had a son in San Francisco named Wong Kim Ark. They had him in San Francisco. And the son went back to China. And when he returned in 1895, California refused him entry. The U.S. government, they refused him entry into the U.S. on the basis of the 1890 Chinese Exclusion Act, which says that he had to be an American citizen. He was a Chinese national, they said, not an American citizen. But Art said, wait a minute, guys. I was born in San Francisco, so I am automatically an American citizen under the 14th Amendment. They said, no, you're Chinese. They came here, they stole it. So he took his case to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in a landmark decision in 1897, called the Wong Kim Ark case, you can read it, it's fascinating. And it's particularly notable because the exact same arguments were made in that case then that the Trump lawyers are making now, 128 years later, about ending birthright citizenship. And the U.S. Supreme Court listened in 1898, and they held that regardless of his parents' immigration status, he was born in San Francisco. So under the 14th Amendment, he's automatically a U.S. citizen. And Melville Fuller, who was the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in that case, wrote in this landmark case, quote, the foregoing considerations, we talked about this here, irresistibly lead us to the conclusion the 14th Amendment affirms ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory. And it talks about the exceptions, which would be resident aliens, born of like foreign sovereigns and diplomats here, okay, not under our jurisdiction. Enemies, people born on foreign ships, and enemies in an invasion, which they rule that out as a military invasion, and certain Indian tribes. So those are the exceptions to birthright citizenship then and now. But he goes on to say the amendment in clear words and manifest intent includes the children born of persons regardless of the race, color, if they were in San Francisco when they were born. Okay. This ruling is of particular interest now because of the degree and unarguable clarity with which it puts these 9-inch nails into every argument that is being made by the Trump team that the 14th Amendment somehow was not intended to grant birthright citizenship. Okay, the exact same arguments were made and lost in 1898 in that case, and so. What is the chance that the Supreme Court, which is big on precedent and following, and it doesn't have a prayer, okay? And any of the legal experts will tell you that, regardless of the Republican or Democrats, okay? There were three big campaign promises that the Trump made. The biggest ones were the ending birthright citizenship, which we just talked about, okay, and launching the mass deportations, which we're going to talk about. And there were a lot of other promises, and prosecuting his enemies, okay. There were others which we'll talk about, but this big three, we just did birthright. Let's go on about the enemies. We talked earlier that there's a whole host of protections in the Constitution for anybody prosecuted for anything. It goes back 500 years of grand juries and that sort of stuff. And no actual prosecutions have been initiated yet. And if they are, they'll suffer the same fate as the birthright. So hordes of lawyers will come in and make these arguments, and the court won't join it. And there are all these robust protections, okay? So along with this legislative immunities to Congress and some of these other government officials, he's threatened. Then you got the Biden pardons and the preemptive pardons he did. And so it is essentially impossible to prosecute them for, the political things they did, which is what he's talking about, prosecute. They disagreed with him. Now, you can pull their clearances, stuff like that. It's petty, it's awful, but that's different than prosecuting them, which is what they've threatened to do. So you'll quickly see all these things come into play if they try to do that, and it will be quickly reach the same fate as the birthright citizenship. Let's talk about mass deportation. Again, we talked about this earlier. There's already been some ICE raids, and I expect that there will be more, and this will be the showy, sort of highly staged, posturing, performative raids. They'll round up some people, maybe even a few thousand, okay? But we're talking about this 14 million here. And so this is just going to be a symbolic thing, and they don't even have the resources to prosecute, to do much. So we'll see where this goes. It's not going to be anything resembling mass deportation, but I do think they will go out and try to find some people they can round up, make a big showy thing about it. But as I mentioned, there's 800 judges assigned to this, or already have 6-year backlogs, don't have enough ICE people. And the only place to put them, they were saying yes, they're going to send them to get no pay. And so as we assess the viability of this campaign promise, let's remind it that deportations are incredibly labor intensive. They require huge commitments of scarce federal resources, personnel, and so forth. They require commitments of law enforcement officers and prosecutors and courts and jails and all this. And I don't see them readying this in any way to have any kind of mass deportation, and anything resembling a mass deportation. The volume is going to be relatively small. It's going to take many years to go, because they'll object to it and so forth. And they're able to deport some of them, they've been convicted. And I think even the Democrats support, if somebody's going to be convicted of a crime, they're here and they're illegal, you want to deport them. Even the Democrats are on record saying they support that, okay? But one of the things that's not getting talked about much is that any massive deportation is going to require an equally massive assistance and cooperation of local and state governments. They can't do it by themselves. I don't think people talking about that. And that ain't going to happen, okay? Why? Because we talk about they're a backbone of their local communities. They pay taxes, Social Security. They would deprive us en masse of restaurant cooks and manual labor and construction and essential hands, housekeepers, meat packers, on and on. And throw those regions into recession. So the American employers are already intensely lobbying the local governments and the federal government to leave it alone and find some way here to solve this thing by allowing them to become legal. So evidencing that the White House recognizes the reality that mass deportation require the active help of local state governments, the White House and the Justice Department issued a threat last week to prosecute all state and local agents that refuse to, quote, actively cooperate with the administration of deportation plans. But just as birthright citizenship, as with birthright, there's a massive constitutional obstacle to enforcing this threat, and that's the 10th Amendment. That prohibits the federal government from forcing any state and local agencies to do anything that would help implement federal policy. You can't force the states to do the federal job, and it highlights this so-called enumeration clause that said that we're taking the rights, certain rights, identified right here, enumerated here, and giving them to the federal government. Everything else in the states and the people. And so there's a multitude, as you might imagine, of U.S. Supreme Court cases on this very subject, okay? It's always been popular with conservative justices because it puts limits on the federal government, And the most notorious recent case is the Printz case, Printz, where in 1997, U.S. Supreme Court held that the federal government cannot make local officials like sheriffs enforce background checks on gun purchasers under the Brady Act, a congressional statute that was passed in the wake of Reagan's assassination attempt, requires background checks, okay? So here now, the Trump administration's they are an identical effort to seek to force the local police to help enforce the Brady Act. In this case, it's the deportation, okay? And the local things are saying we're not going to cooperate. And there's just no way that's going to be enforced. They'll bring up the Pringle case and they'll throw it out. And so just as they unsuccessfully tried in the Pringle case, it's going to fail here. Now let's go back now for a second on the prosecuting the enemies. I mentioned there's no active efforts to enforce this. To actually prosecute them. It's one thing to pull their clearances and fire them and things like that, which we'll talk about. The Social Security may block this, civil service may block that, but it's going to backfire on all kinds of ways. But the 10th Amendment is going to stand squarely in the way of the deportation thing, okay, and it's going to limit it to a very small scale. And I do want to mention that there's this distinction between, as you watch this unfold, between obstructing the federal government, which is like taking people and hiding them and things like that, and assisting it, okay? Local governments are not going to be able to legally obstruct the feds. like actively assisting and hiding them and helping them avoid ICE. They can't do that, okay? But uh, they can um, uh, refuse to assist. Okay, you're going to see this distinction perhaps litigating in court, and but it's not going to be anything that's going to be sufficient to help the administration, and this is going to end up being a largely empty threat. And you can see that Illinois Governor Pritzker boldly and courageously told Trump that he's going to stand right in the way of any effort of the administration to reach beyond its narrow legal entitlements under the 10th Amendment. So it's going to be some fun ahead, folks, watching all this unfold, okay? And there are a lot of campaign promises that now, there are a lot of things he's doing that were not campaign promises that he's suddenly undertaking that were not, he's doing, like, for example, firing all the inspector generals. Overnight there was all these inspector generals that were fired. It is the statute in the federal government requires, if you're going to fire one, you have to cite the reasons for it, and you have to give 30 days notice to Congress. They didn't do any of that. So that on its face, the firings are illegal. But why would you want to fire if you don't like the federal government? You think here are these independent guys who've done a really great job of going in and telling the federal government, hey, you can't do it. You can't do this. You got to do that. They have really kept things legal and proper, and they provide an outlet for people to object. And they've worked remarkably well. They were very supported by the Reagan and other that helped put this in place. So let's look at some other campaign accomplishments. He said he was going to oppose imports on day one, 25% Mexico and China and Canada, even higher rate on Chinese. And he postponed this on Saturday to February 1st, which is the day after tomorrow. And so we have to wait to see what happens. None of them have imposed it, but experts, again, are scratching their heads, since tariffs are essentially just taxes on consumers. And they are paid by the consumers. Nothing's paid by these foreign exporters.
I don't think he's still, I honestly, still, he was going to appoint a tariff tax collector.
That's what the tariffs tax, and it's going to automatically, immediately increase the cost of goods and result in huge inflation. If there's one thing that voters have made clear in this election, is they hate prices going up, and that's what he's promised to fix. And they hate inflation, and this is going to just, immediately trigger those things. Okay, he promised to restore the travel ban. Okay, and remember his travel ban with a Muslim was struck down by the courts 3 times, and he had to keep redoing it and watering it down until he finally got it passed the 3rd time. But he's thrown it. A whole bunch of countries can't come in here, and it's not clear what's going to happen with this. It's very watered down with all kinds of exceptions to it. And the Supreme Court only approved the last one by 5-4 on the 4th version. So if they're reinstituted in this attenuated, much reduced format in the 2017 versions, they may go into effect. We'll see. He promised to end the Ukraine-Russia war within 24 hours. He stepped in. He told Russia what to do. He told Putin, and he issued his suggestion. And Putin said, pound sand. And well, I'm going to put sanctions on you. He said, well, you already done that, and I'm going to do this and that. And Putin says, we've already done that. Go ahead and do it. And so nothing has come of that. And, it's going to be extremely difficult. What he did do was he put 25% tariffs on Colombia. And that's an interesting little case there. The Colombian president, as a teenager, joined this far-left Marxist group there, insurgent in Colombia. And so he saw an opportunity. They have been accepting returned migrants to Colombia in commercial planes for a long time, a lot of them. And so suddenly the Trump administration said, we're going to put them in handcuffs and put them on military planes and send them, And so he saw this as an opportunity to grandstand for himself and say, I'm going to stand up there. So he said, we're not letting them here. And this just played right into Trump's hands, and he immediately slaps tariffs on him. And then all the businesses there, we got our flowers from there. Our roses and stuff come from Colombia and a number of other things. And so they could not afford a 25%. So it forced him to back down on this and get some kind of face saving. So that was an interesting little thing. But I think that it was different. Colombia is one of our closest allies, and so is Denmark, and so is Canada. So it's interesting to see him beating up, bullying on those people. He said he was going to bring prices down and end inflation. And this has not happened. It's never going to happen because they're not within the direct control of any president of the United States. And nothing he's undertaken or even promised or planned will likely have any effect on prices or reduce any effect is likely to make them go up. So he continues to clamor for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, but that would spur inflation. And he plans to extend the tax cuts, and that's going to exacerbate the deficit. That's inflationary and will up interest rates. And so none of these things are going to accomplish that. And so we're going to see this come into contact with reality, and interesting to see where it's going to go. He promised to extend this 2017 tax cuts. That's going to require changing that will require a provision of Congress. It's not been sought, and it's interesting that nothing that he's done so far with all these executive, he loves executive because he can be king, he can just do it himself, he doesn't have to get, he's never proposed anything that requires Congress, and it's all been just something he can do himself, okay? But fixing this 2017 will require an act of Congress. Right now, the federal budget is running a $1.5 billion deficit, okay? Any tax cuts to give his billionaire buddies is going to greatly exacerbate inflation, and that's what will happen if these tax cuts are going to effect. And so that's going to another collision with reality here. What's going to happen that could cause an immediate problem, he promised to end taxes on incomes workers make from tips and overtime and Social Security benefits. That's also requires congressional approval, which he's not even sought yet, but it could be achieved. So there's a lot of other relatively mundane things that he's promised that can be carried out. Again, nothing that he never sought anything that requires congressional approval. Loves these EOs, okay, but executive orders are very tenuous and tiny way to try to affect anything that makes a long-term difference, okay? They automatically expire as soon as he's out of office. And you can rest assured that if the Democrat takes office, they're gone, all of them, instantaneously. And so
it's so tiring. Just could you just put a hold on those? Keep those easily easily accessible 4 years from now. It's
who knows what's going to happen 4 years now, but you can rest assured that if a Democrat takes office, that all this is going to be dissolved overnight. I mean, that's what's been going back and forth for a while. That's nothing new in that. He's put people looking at things he can do and has done. He's put people in cabinet and federal agents like the head of the FBI and the Justice Department who have promised to dismantle those agencies and disrupt all these policies and goals, which are all blending on DEI and this he can do, and he's doing, okay? And Pam Bondi has blocked, who's now the head of the Justice Department. She's blocked all the civil rights cases, includes those of justice, police misconduct, like Troy. And these things have been credited by multiple administrations, going back Republican and Democrat, with reforming hitherto rogue police departments and helping everybody. And he faces no immediate court opposition on this thing, but it's unclear how far this can be taken. And this and the J6 pardons, which you could also do and did, is generating a ferocious backlash. And we're seeing even Republican senators lamenting this, and law enforcement. And adding to all this backlash is these key intelligence operatives he's firing. Are he firing people with vital knowledge, institutional knowledge about American intelligence and the threats to, and just firing them wholesale. And in Justice Department as well, pardoning everybody that worked on these legal things, blocking access to the case that against people that blocked access to abortion clinics. A lot of this stuff is going to come back to haunt the Republicans downstream because these are norms that with the Nixon administration, there were all these norms put in place about how we're going to treat each other. And, I remember the Watergate hearings were just extraordinarily amazing for their decor and the degree to which the Republicans were law and order and honorable and respectful, and how both sides just said, what's illegal, we're not going to allow. And it's what a contrast today. And so he's trying to dismantle the federal government, and and replace it. But it is very easy to go in and destroy these institutions and their policy and everything. But it's going to be much, 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 much more difficult to replace them with something that's constructive, that can build a better America for the ordinary guy. All he's doing now is creating this huge vulnerability to foreign spies and enemies. He's encouraging lawlessness encouraging victimizations against minorities and prejudices. And what is this doing to make America better or great again? Another thing that's not being covered, I see, which is starting to be covered now, is that firing all these people. Remember back in the 19th century, there was a Garfield administration, and Garfield was assassinated. And Garfield and his administration, from the beginning of the Republic till Garfield, whenever a new federal president came in, they fired everybody in the federal government and brought in all their buddies and their cronies to replace them. Okay. And this got more and more egregious, and they put in right down to the local postmaster, and they fired them and put their own guy in. And people thought this is really not the way to run in a growing industrial country. You just can't be firing everybody like this. So they came up with a civil service reform. They would take the career people, not the leaders. Yeah, you can change that, but the regular, ordinary rank and file people that run the government, we're going to put those people and call them civil servants, and protect their jobs. And this is popular with both sides, and it's been enacted in the 1880s. In fact, the guy that killed James Garfield, Charles Guiteau, was a stalwart, the guy who was against civil service reform. Remember that? We were in high school, and he went and shot, because he was but actually he wasn't. That's what we learned in high school, but that was wrong. The Guiteau was one of these guys that we've, unfortunately, as Americans, have gotten only too familiar with. He was this lone single guy who was crazy. He would go in gun shops in Washington and look at revolvers. If I bought that revolver there and shot somebody important, would I become famous? And so this guy was, like so many of the others, he was crazy, and had nothing to do with civil service reform, but somehow that got into the books. But anyway, civil service laws protect these people, and he's firing them. So you can expect that the courts will have some weighing in on that pretty quickly, especially the career professionals. And replacing everybody down here. So inefficiency and corruption had gotten egregious by the 1880s. And so that's when the Republicans, within the liberals, and President Garfield, in 1883, they passed civil service reform, and created the nonpartisan civil service for the rank and file professionals. And we're going to see that now being challenged, and you'll see the courts coming in to weigh in on it. And I think that they're going to lose on this one. I don't think that people really want to see wholesale firings of nonpartisan people. So this was a big deal, and I think I'm voting that's going to get reversed. Okay, and so this is another one I think will ultimately not be affected. Okay, and a lot of it's going to end up in the courts, and I mentioned we're in this interval between executive orders being challenged and executive orders being determined to be by effect, legal or not, and it's going to be years. Okay, in the meantime, we're facing all these huge challenges. Okay, we saw that this AI thing called a shockwave. China may be ahead of us in AI, and that is shocking. And this week, the climate change, these unstoppable wildfires, tornadoes, floods, droughts, future pandemics, and the National Institute of Health has 110 Nobel Prizes. He wants to destroy this. It protected us and protected the world against disease. He wants to get rid of that with brainworm Bobby, So these future pandemics are brewing out there. They're coming for us, okay? And there were 156 members of the National Institute of Health. They won 92 Nobel Prizes for advancing medicine. We're going to throw those people out. And so our antiquated and profoundly decentralized education system continues to graduate students in America who are falling ever further behind our counterparts all around the world. We're now at the bottom of the developed world in civics, math, and science. And this breathtaking ignorance is growing, and these other nations are laughing at us, but the federal government has grown. It's grown from 4 trillion, I'm sorry, budget in 2017 when Trump first took office in 2017. And when he took office today, it's back to 7 trillion a year for the federal government. Okay. And so people are saying, we've got little to show for this extra expense, healthcare, Social Security, infrastructure, budget shortfalls everywhere. The chasm between the rich and the poor in America continues to grow. Deregulation, tax cuts for the rich, ever more billionaires, enough to eat. So as we watch all this posturing that's going on in lieu of true reforms, people are wondering, what are we doing here? I keep looking for this. What are we doing that might make America better? So I'm going to talk about that now. Okay, I'm going to talk about real solutions. Okay, one of the healthiest things about our democracy is every 2 years, all the House representatives have to stand election. Every 2 years, a third of the Senate. Every 4 years, the president has a standard, new set of eyes coming in, new values. Automatic renewal going on, periodic refreshing of our political leadership, fresh eyes, new ideas coming into the legislative executive branch to look anew at our problems and reassess how to address our challenges. Okay. Well, these constant new technologies coming up age faster and faster, ever faster changing economic and military environments needing better responses. Renewal like this is vital and to all companies, to the federal government, to all companies in the United States as well. Okay, and nowhere is this more clear than all these unicorns I was telling you about, companies that suddenly become worth $1 billion. Okay, they went from 0 to $1 billion in 25 years, what we call a unicorn. And I mentioned San Francisco as 200 of them. They usually start out as 10 people or 5, and they quickly everything becomes chaos and everything when the company reaches 100 employees, and that becomes obsolete when they reach 1,000, and again when they reach 25,000. Okay, so as time goes on in this ever fast changing environment, these leadership strategies have become obsolete. The tactics, the vision, they can't keep track, and there's overlap, duplications, inefficiency, fuzzying of the goals and targets, and imprecision in the overall strategy. And there's upheavals, changes, and chaos. Okay. And to a lesser degree over time, the same exact principles and things happen to older, stable companies and to the military and to the bureaucracies that run nations, our bureaucracies. Okay. So what are we doing here? As these markets, the companies that do this have come to recognize, okay, that they have to perpetually change, and they've got to do it or else they will ultimately fail. It's been going on since the Industrial Revolution, and it's exponentially accelerating today. So it no way implies that the people that are doing things and running things are making obvious mistakes or they're becoming competent. It's a universal process associated with the draw of organizations. And you can see examples of this in the military as well. And I'll give you an example. There's a British admiral named Percy Scott, and he advanced naval warfare by leaps and bounds. But at every breakthrough he was chastised by his own admiralty and punished. He developed a semaphore, the light that they could communicate, gun ranging, firefighting on ships, and all ignored by the British. And they were implemented by the Germans. And the Germans used it against them in the Battle of Jutland. British lost because they lost more men to the ranging system that Scott himself had developed, but they were deployed on German ships. Okay, he warned about submarines in the future, and it was ignored. And that was back in 1910. He suggested that planes could soon be launched from ships, ignored. The exact same needs led him to rethink and revitalize. You know, they exist today more than ever. Okay. We need to listen to people and heed the advice of the Percy Scotts, you know. So when DeepSeek, this Chinese company, released it, it freaked everybody out there. DeepSeek, artificial intelligence. Okay. Uh, and uh, and the stories about this, you know, got lost in this business about uh, you know, talking about Elon Musk's hand gestures. They lost the fact that we're not addressing this, and what we need to do, and this question, you know. So, um, what I want to talk about is that there is a solution to this, okay, and it is now in place. It's one of our secret weapons that nobody seems to know about, okay. And it's in place all across our private industry, especially in the startups. Okay, and it's going to sound mundane, but it's not. Okay, and that is that this industry, they call themselves consultants. Okay, and that's just the name, but there's the big three: McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and Bain. But now there's a host of smaller ones, you know, very elite. They hire the most top people from Stanford Graduate School of Business and Harvard, and they put together these models of how to do strategy, how to do digital growth, the green innovations, transformations with healthcare. They put together all this stuff, and they do it really, really well. These companies are all over the U.S. and they are hired by all of our startups. They're hired by even our big companies, and they are incredibly effective. You know, my daughter, I know I'm not going to mention her name or what company she works for. She's a top graduate at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and she works with these teams doing this. And she tells me about it, and she and her colleagues will go out and sit down with, you know, 50 tech bros in this company, and then go into their models about, you know, how to improve their company, and how to address you know, all the problems, how to make it more profitable, how to reimagine it, how to reorganize it, how to save money, and it's enormously profitable. They help them refresh, reorganize, re-envision their strategies, and it works so incredibly. These companies come right back. They charge them a lot of money for this, but it
Well,
makes
it's unique that both you and I have children in the same arena. And again, I have a son that has an array of degrees, knows Chinese and French, and studied overseas, and now is a consultant on the world stage. And we don't have to talk about the company, but it's a rather large company that he works for, and it's amazing the companies that he consults for. And I can't wait to see if you're going to try to implement this in Washington, D.C. Is this
right.
what we're suggesting, Dr. Mills, as a solution for this open wound that we have?
Indeed, the people that run these companies that hire the consultants, you know, they are extremely brilliant people, okay, and they're passionately motivated, young management professionals, mostly engineers and tech people, and they have to remain laser focused on making their own company, or if it's an older company, making it succeed in this product in a ferociously competitive environment today. They're not trained in economic complex theory or organizational dynamics, but these consultants are. And they come in and they tell them how to instantly revitalize, reorganize, reimagine their companies and its goals. And when they do that, they have an immediate, enormous return, which makes these companies in a huge demand because they work. Okay. And they can easily do it as you're success. You know where I'm going on this. Okay. This is the secret weapon to do something with the federal government instead of, you know, doing all this DEI and trans and all this stuff that can make no difference whatsoever, you know, this huge, probably is bloated, you know, and every organization that's old and is big like this can be immensely improved and reimagined. I mean, my daughter goes in, she says, this division here, why don't you just reorganize that and subsume it under this one, and you can let half of them go. And once you create a new one over here, they just go through and they do this. And so what we could do right now, my proposal for you is we have the solution. It's right here in our grasp. Okay. as we go out and everybody, including the conservatives, say the federal government's top heavy, bloated, inefficient, disorganized, and so what we could do is go out and hire a small army of these brilliant young nonpartisan consultants, with their MBAs, some elite universities, and their training, okay, and turn them loose on the federal government and say, starting with the Pentagon, okay, and then to the notoriously non-competitive defense contracting procurement industry, and then go to the federal agencies one by one, okay, and reform them, okay, and reimagine them, okay, and how they should function from the ground up, okay, and even the Democrats, I mean, everybody would cheer this on. Trump would get credit for it, okay? And just contemplate with me for a moment how glorious this would be. Instead of having, anti-vaxxers and crackpot theorists and everything, and, doing this culture war, you know, imagine what it would be like to have these experts coming in there and reforming America and making it work for everybody and making it more efficient, and it would work. We would all win, and Trump would be lionized, okay, by all sides because it worked, and be a win for all Americans. We're at this moment now where we are richer and more prosperous than we've ever been before. Inflation's low, employment's low. With the envy of the world, lots of people are coming here, okay, and our GDP keeps coming. We were just, a few years ago, a generation ago, we were a fraction. Our GDP was a fraction of the NATO. Now we're almost double NATO, right? I mean, U.S. keeps surging up. Europeans' economy is languishing, and we should be rejoicing on this thing, but we're being torn to pieces. We're out bullying our allies. We have this new Secretary of Defense, and he's obsessed with readiness, but what he wants to do is rehire anti-vaxxers back into the military. George Washington ordered all of his troops vaccinated, no exceptions, 248 years ago, and against smallpox. And his adversaries here from Britain, they couldn't get access to the vaccine, so they suffered horribly from smallpox. This gave George Washington a decisive edge, and he won his huge victory because of that. And if you told him, George, 248 years from now, after he gave his vaccines, that the head of the U.S. military is going to be an anti-vaxxer, I mean, what is the military going to do when unvaccinated soldiers on the battlefield, a crowded barracks and close quarters and tanks and ships, suddenly become decisive, desperately sick with the next pandemic virus, or even the ones that go around without that? Does readiness mean that, which he's obsessed on, bringing field hospitals and morgues around with our military wherever we go to take care of those soldiers that refuse vaccines and are sickened by the next pandemic, or many of these dangerous vaccines that exist right now? So anyway, this America has this army it's our secret competitiveness weapon in the world. Okay, that's why we have all these startups. That's why we are the head of the innovation, and why we have such a GDP that keeps on going up. It's because we have these consultants, and their work product makes America work better. It makes America great, and those immense talents could be trained on government inefficiency, and we that way, if we did it, I'm not holding my breath, but if we did that, then both the Democrats and the Republicans would win big and can join hands in celebrating. So I've given you, dear listeners, so hopefully some insights into the campaign promises of the administration that can be kept, and ones that I don't think can be, and some understanding of the challenges that we're facing with the more controversial and as yet unkept promises. In addition, I provided a clear, simple, feasible, and ready available option to use America's unrivaled consulting industry to immediately address and improve the federal government, the military, and make government work to improve the lives of all Americans, especially ordinary Americans. And I submit that's a completely workable solution to reimagine the federal government to work for everybody. And that's it for today. I'll be back soon with Randy, and we will I have another fascinating podcast with new ideas, new solutions, and new status reports on the 2020 campaign promises, and the implementation of those campaign promises, and some new fun stuff. And so have a good week. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again here. Take care.
Well, Robert, I want to thank you for all that insight. I think I'm going to go get a cold compress, put it on my forehead, lay down, and imagine all the congressmen and senators in the world calling up experts in the field to come in and help them do their job. Because, you know, logic and reason is running rampant in Washington, D.C. No, wait a minute, that's not right.
Illogic.
Logic and reason overcomes their ability to run for fear of, if they lose their job, Robert, where do they go as an ex-congressman and an ex-senator? It's on their resume, and all it does is prove possibly that they have a misspent not only youth, but middle age and senior age, and serving their time right now in Washington, because it's all frozen. And you're right. The thing that's beautiful about what you had to say, and just to highlight as we come to a close, is that we have a lot of talent in the country. And I know your daughter is extremely highly sought after and highly talented. And when you have people like that, that could add a lot into our efficiencies, it would take an unimaginable leap by people sitting in Washington to sit and say, okay, let's go do that. Because right now, basically all they're really trying to do is hold on to their job. I mean, they do anything, bow down to the king or bow down to the pressures that they have in a way that is, and I find very, very sad. So I look forward to our next Why People Believe That Things That Ain't So, brought to you by Robert Mills. Because today, why people believe things that ain't so, I think you have a lot of heavy meat to chew on, digest. Go back and listen to it. A lot of history. I appreciate all the history, the foundational information that you bring to us with your background in law. Certainly, your focus is coming from that end. But again, we look forward to our next time getting together. I'm sure, as we say, our thoughts and minds and hearts and prayers are with those that and the families that lost their lives today in the tragic plane crash, and we hope that peace can be given to them, and the finding out what happened in that scenario. But we also hope that the strength of our country can go forward. All we're really trying to do is take a look logically at some of the things that are said, and as we all, there is this big middle. Right now, after the first week after the inauguration, the people in the middle are leaning a little differently already after 10 days. They move back and forth. It's a fine line. So we'll take a look at that at our next episode. So anyway, Robert, thank you very much coming out there from California. Don't start any brush fires here in Illinois. All we worry about is the cold, occasional earthquake, a tornado, and we welcome all of our friends that like to come and visit us. So anyway, this is Old Uncle Randy along with Robert Mills, and this is provided to you through Global Eco Traveling, LLC, Live Eco Style, Inc., and the Distillery Channel Media, LLC. It's a combination of all of our companies bringing this to you on our Excited Minds Media TV.com, on Roku and Fire TV. You can always listen to these. This is going to be in a podcast. It will be going out on your favorite podcast channel. So as obviously you found it here at the end of the show, always look for us anywhere your favorite podcast can be found. And again, that is the Distillery Channel Media on our podcasting. It's been that way for years, so that's the umbrella that we go under. So anyway, Robert Mills, thank you. Appreciate your tremendous insights. And again, old Uncle Randy, and we say be safe and healthy and go out there and lead a better life and enjoy today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.